This week on the Baunfire podcast, I will be covering Hellblade 2 getting a photo mode, The Division 2 celebrates 5 years, Saber escapes the embrace, and much more. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this is a podcast about video game news, reviews, rumors, and speculation. Before we get started, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the like button there, and leave a comment with your feedback or questions for the next episode. Thank you to everyone who supports my content on Patreon, Twitch, YouTube, and a special thanks to producer level supporter Hassan. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, please consider checking out those platforms at the link in the description of the show. So, what a week. Kind of a boring week, kind of a quiet week for the most part. Relatively quiet when it came to layoffs and stuff like that. We did have Respawn, unfortunately, suffer some layoffs. I believe specifically from their Apex team. I didn't really include that in the stories this week because I didn't really see any specific details on it. I just know from some people I follow and from some news stories that happened, and obviously it sucks. In general, though, I don't think there was anything really big and breaking this week, but I did think that would make this a good opportunity to maybe change up the format of the podcast a little bit. And I'm going to be trying to experiment a bit with some new advertising methods and so on and so forth. So if you notice any changes, everything's okay, nothing's wrong. I just have noticed a slight decrease in listenership. And I really like doing this show, and I think I do a pretty good job. So I want to try to do things that will keep this podcast healthy and worthwhile to do. And this is the result of that. So if you notice a little change up here, the addition of this kind of ad-libbed portion before we get into the news, that's what's going on. And I think that should be good. So with that said, let's get into the news. So first, we're going to start off with the platforms. We'll hit up Xbox first, and kind of an Xbox/PlayStation story. Sea of Thieves is currently the best-selling pre-order on PlayStation in the UK and US. There's a few parts of this story that I think are interesting to consider. I would say the biggest one being that I don't know if there's any games for the PlayStation that are like pre-orderable right now that people are really, really hyped about. I think it's kind of an under talked about story that, you know, especially first party games, it looks like Spider-Man 2 might be the only one since God of War Ragnarok that we're really going to get until 2025, at least, which is pretty strange. I think at one point people thought that maybe we would get Wolverine this year. And that would be obviously a big deal. Anything coming from Insomniac is going to be pretty big. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Whether it was even just partially due to those leaks or not, I don't think it was. I don't know. But I suspect that is a big factor of why, you know, if there's a God of War coming out this year, I highly suspect that Sea of Thieves wouldn't be the highest pre-ordered game. Regardless, it's still really cool. I think that the feeling and the strategy behind Xbox moving some of their games to multi-platform is being proven pretty true here. Sea of Thieves has always been one of the games that when these conversations would come up about whether or not, you know, Xbox or any of these platforms should put their exclusive games on other platforms, Sea of Thieves has always been one that's been part of this conversation. And especially recently in the last couple months when all of this craziness has been going on, Sea of Thieves was such a good candidate because it's been out for a really long time. It's certainly probably peaked its user base on PC and Xbox. And so what do you need from a live service game? You need players. And when you've kind of tapped out your current platforms, it only seems natural to say, hey, we've already invested all of this money into this game, into this franchise, into this live service content. Why not, bring it to more people, make some more money, is what it's all about. So I think this is really exciting and cool. And I don't expect it to be much of an olive branch. If I've seen correctly, PlayStation is not advertising for this at all, like zero, zilch, nada, and it's understandable to a point. Now, when it goes the other way with having like MLB The Show 24 on Xbox, they actually advertise it quite a bit. But that is a unique situation. That is Sony's essentially being forced by the license holder, which is the MLB, to do that. So it's a slightly different situation. But I think that if people were looking for evidence that, on a limited basis, Xbox putting their exclusives on other platforms, especially PlayStation, if you were looking for evidence of that working, this seems to be an early indicator that at least with some games, it's going to be very popular. My fear is that with a game like Hi-Fi Rush, say, I think that hype is kind of come and gone. It is a very, very, very good game that people should play. But I suspect that it won't have the same pull that Sea of Thieves did. But who knows? I very well could be doing this exact same story here in a couple months, talking about Hi-Fi Rush and how it's blown up over on the PlayStation. I did see someone make kind of a funny joke that even though the prowess of PlayStation is their exclusive games, this may be a year where Xbox's exclusives going third party may end up being the biggest games on PlayStation. And there's a very real chance that like Sea of Thieves could be one of the highest selling games on PlayStation this year. So that could be an interesting situation. In other interesting situations, but mostly expected, we got confirmation from Ninja Theory that Hellblade 2 will have a photo mode. I don't believe Hellblade 1 has one. That game kind of came out during or right before the whole like photo mode revolution, where now every game has to have a photo mode. Come on, Baldur's Gate, let's work on it, please. But yeah, cool. This should be great. Hellblade 2 is almost certainly, and from the screenshots they showed us, is certainly going to be a visual spectacle, is going to be, I think, and I suspect, probably the most impressive current gen game from a fidelity standpoint. I think that when you hear that this game is only going to be about the length of the first one, which is 5 to 10 hours, that it's going to be a reduced price. It's not going to be this big 40-hour God of War experience, which some people were hoping for, including myself, if I have to be honest. I still think this could be fine. This still could be a good thing. And I think especially if the goal of Hellblade is to tell another emotional, relatively quick but deep story, backed up with showing off everything that Unreal 5 has to give, especially on the consoles, I think that's going to be fine. And I think having this photo mode is going to be a good way for people to show off some of that stuff organically. I'm still so excited about Hellblade 2. It's between that and Star Wars Outlaws are my two favorites for Game of the Year this year. Obviously Helldivers 2 is kind of, has kind of crept into that spot so far. But at the same time, we haven't had many games come out that I was really, really that worried about or excited for. So, and then I still think my Ghost pick is possibly Dragon Age Dreadwolf, if assuming that comes out late this year, which it still is being rumored too. So we will see. Moving over to PlayStation, the Spider-Man: The Great Web trailer leaked. This is one of the canceled games that leaked during the Insomniac leaks. I believe this is the first footage or any kind of media we've seen about it. Other than that, it was, I think, all text and documents. This was interesting. I haven't played these games. It's kind of hard to not hear about how fun they are to play and how how much like Spider-Man you do feel like when you're playing these games, even though they do seem to have their their downsides as well. What's interesting is amongst the people who I know really, really, really like Spider-Man 1 and 2 and Miles Morales, is there was kind of an interesting vibe that people weren't really convinced this was going to be like a really viable game. This I think it was 5-player co-op where you'd all be playing as different Spider-Men. I can't remember if you were supposed to be able to design your own or if you were going to be picking from various ones in the very large Spider-Verse. But it's always a shame, and I think what the biggest shame is that you can see even just from this trailer, they seemed like they were probably pretty far along with the development of this game, to make the trailer they made. So, always a bummer to see work not come to fruition, but it happens. It's the game industry, and unfortunately, there's probably many more stories like this than people could ever imagine. Moving over to Nintendo, we had the March 10th or Mario Day announcements. It was mostly just some little game stuff, arcade things like that. But the biggest one was probably the confirmation that a new Super Mario Brothers movie is in the works, and it is expected in 2026. So be on the lookout for that. I really enjoyed the last movie. I thought Chris Pratt did a fine job. I thought it was really fun. It's very visually appealing. My daughter really, really loves it. She loves Princess Peach because she's a tough, strong lady, and so is my daughter. Really just cool movie. So I'm excited to see more from it. They've been kind of wishy-washy on whether or not this is going to be like a sequel or if it's going to be like a whole new experience entirely. So I'll be kind of curious to what happens there, but we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be a couple years. We also found out that there's a new Pokemon studio called Pokemon Works, and it is going to be housed in the same building as the Pokemon developer that made Diamond and Shining a few years back. No real word on what this studio could be getting spun up for. With Nintendo, you never know. Like, this could be a new studio for a mobile game or for another 24 FPS Switch game that they put out before the Switch 2. Obviously, if they're spinning up this studio now, they're probably not making the game that's going to come out anytime soon, or it could just be a support studio. I didn't really see. I actually checked a couple sources on this one and couldn't really get any clear indication on what this studio is going to be for, but I suspect in the long run, we will eventually find out. Moving on to other news not related to the big platforms, Saber Interactive, the sale is official, but not really to who. We don't necessarily know exactly who they're going to. The rumor I've seen is that they actually basically started a group so they could sell themselves to themselves. I try not to think too much about how these big businesses do things. When you're talking about them being sold for $250 million, that's an amount of money I just can't even fathom. So I try not to think too much about this stuff. There is some interesting stuff going on with which studios are going with Saber and which IP is going with them or isn't. One of the notable games that will not be going with them is Metro. If Metro's developer gets bought and brought over with Saber, which apparently hasn't happened yet, but is an option that Saber can take. It's weird. Again, these big corporate actions are just not my cup of tea or not my wheelhouse. I suspect most people listening, that is also not the case. So it's one of those things where I just kind of repeat what I see, kind of give my take on how I feel about it in general, and then kind of wait for all the things to actually happen. Good for Saber. The Embracer Group seems... The Embracer Group as a publisher, there's been all this talk about how consolidation is bad and all of that. And I generally agree. But when you conflate like how Microsoft is scooping up studios and then treating those studios after they have them, which tends to come with the expected layoffs and things like that. But then you compare how they've handled it to like what Embracer Group has done, who they just, went on a spree basically and bought all these people. And then, either by not giving those studios enough support or whatever, I can't think of a single Embracer Group game that's released. I mean, surely the reason that they're selling off all these studios is because they aren't making any money. They're only losing money, So I can't imagine this is the end of this. I can't imagine Saber is the last studio and I guess publisher within Embracer that's going to leave. In fact, I believe there's already rumors that they're already shopping out more studios to buyers and things like that. So, the Embracer Group seemed almost like someone just had like money burning a hole in their pocket and they just decided to try to be a big game publisher, and they have just failed so spectacularly that it almost seems like it's on purpose. Like I've said this a few times, that like the Embracer Group is so inept, it almost seems like it's on purpose. Very strange, but what can you say? Summer Game Fest got officially announced and it will be coming on June 7th. You can look up the time that they're trying to make it work for everyone all over the world. For me, it's going to be in the late afternoon, and I will almost certainly be streaming that and doing and so on. I am making sure this year I don't plan our family vacation the same week/weekend of Summer Game Fest and any of the other showcases. I really do enjoy paying attention to those and being in witness to them with people in the community and stuff like that. So I will try to be around this time so that I don't have to sit in a hotel room while my daughter and wife are in a swimming pool watching all the announcements. So this is cool, I guess. They're going to talk about participating studios and publishers and such as the months go by. I personally have just basically kind of lost faith in Jeff Keighley's shows. I know a lot of people like him. A lot of people like his shows and what he does. And that's fine, Yeah, he's just not my cup of tea. I get kind of frustrated because I feel like he's kind of been like anointed like king of gamers by a lot of journalists and even some fans, and kind of this like anti-establishment, almost like, especially with people, hating E3 and ESA, kind of clinging to Jeff and, maybe being a bit blind to how flawed his whole situation is, at least in my opinion. This show, it doesn't need to be 3 hours long. The Game Awards don't need to be that long. It should be like 90 minutes max. And what's interesting is that whenever you bring up the subject of his shows being like 2.5, 3 hours long, that tends to go along with criticisms about how many ads he does. Hey, you can't tell the difference, or even though I think you can, between games that like he maybe didn't pay for and that he just wanted the platform or wanted them to show their thing on his show. The difference between the studios who are there because they want to be and the studios who are there just to be advertised, in my opinion, is so clear to see, and it makes up like 2/3 of his show. Either that or him bringing on famous people that he wants to get to know and doing his whole like ego thing. Regardless of those things, I just I really hope he's learned his lessons, and I just have no reason to believe he has. Every single year, people are like, "Oh, he's still trying to figure things out." Blah blah blah. You just can't talk as much crap about E3 as he does. You can't do the things that he does, at least in my opinion, and then expect people to treat you like you're like a newborn baby every year. His shows are often bland and boring and filled with just filler content. And, even at the Game Awards last year, it was longer than ever. And and even then, they limited everyone's speeches to 30 seconds or less, including the people who won like the biggest awards. In the top 2 or 3 awards, one of them was given off stage. It's really weird. I just don't understand why so many people see Jeff as like my everyday gamer buddy who has connections. I'm later to the game, I guess. I didn't pay attention to him until after he'd started this stuff. But I can't think of anyone more corporate in the industry than Jeff Keighley. And that's fine. I just kind of wish people would stop giving these kind of hot takes of like, kind of acting like Jeff is anything more than that. It's his job, it's his career, it's how he makes his money, I assume, even though I know, he is like a Nepo baby. So, maybe he isn't too worried about his, money in the long run. But I'm glad it exists, right? I just wish there weren't so many bad vibes around it, and I just wish that it was just a better show, because the Summer Game Fest have been bad. Like last year, I think Summer Game Fest was the worst of the showcases. It was worse than Ubisoft's, and Ubisoft's are almost always the worst. Ubisoft's was actually kind of decent last year. So I don't know. I hope he's learned his lessons. I don't think he has. I think with E3 gone, he's only going to feel more empowered to do the things he wants. There's a chance that this IGN show maybe puts some pressure on him, but I doubt it. They'll probably give up on it next year. Like, I just I really wish Jeff Keighley wasn't the gaming ambassador. Is how I kind of feel at the end of the day. Moving on to a more exciting story. This may sound like deja vu, but The Division 2 is 5 years old. So I think it was just last week I talked about how the Division franchise, the first game, had came out, 8 years before. Now we're celebrating the 5th birthday of The Division 2. The Division 2 is such an interesting game because to someone who's never played it before, on paper, it's like the perfect looter shooter if you appreciate its aesthetic and things like that, right? Like if you aren't wanting, super space sci-fi or something. But on paper, it's been like the best live service game ever made, in some ways. But in reality, I think the truth is a little less exciting than that. I think that The Division 2 was a game that really knew what it was when it came out. And then over the years, as it seems like they transitioned to the ongoing development team, they, in my opinion, kind of lost their edge or lost whatever, like just kind of lost what they were going for. Maybe, I don't know. I just really wish the Division 2, especially if they do a year 6, which I think they have already confirmed, even this year 5, and arguably even some of the previous years of content haven't really felt worth it, at least not to me. The story that they've been trying to tell through this stuff is like interesting, but I still don't really think it's worth, all of the kind of, in my opinion, half-finished content they put out in order to continue putting content out. Especially this current season. It was supposed to change up the formula of their post-release content, and in my opinion, it's never been worse. It is just not very good, and not very compelling, and not very exciting to play. But with all of that negative stuff said, I am still glad that they're still supporting it and doing it for the people who really want that. I check into the Division 2 every now and then, just to play like new manhunt targets. I'm certainly not farming anything at this point, and I've basically used the same build for like 5 years. So regardless, congratulations to Julian Garrity, to Yannick Bukachu or whatever. I've never been able to say his last name right. And everyone associated with the Division 2, currently and in the past. One of the most important games in my life because of what it's done for me. And just a game I'm really going to hold dear forever, but also a game that I can't wait to replace with a third game. I am not one that really wants more years of content. I would rather just get a new game in a few years, but we'll see what happens. I'm not holding my breath. We found out that Power World is going to be introducing its first big raid battle. We found out more about the studio that made Power World. It's a studio of about 55 people. They made the game with less than $7 million of development cost, and that they are not in talks with Microsoft about acquisition prior to some rumors that were going around. That $7 million mark is pretty wild, because I bet they made their money back extremely quickly. So good for them. You like to see that. I really enjoyed Power World I probably played 25 or 30 hours of it. It was definitely neat. Probably never going to play it again. I'm good. I got my fill of it. I get what it is. The things that I've seen that they're adding don't really appeal to me. So it's a game that I played and I enjoyed it, and I will probably never touch it again. And it's okay to do that, or at least you have my permission to do that, because I think that's okay to do. What might not be okay to do is that Watch Dogs has a movie in the work. The Ubisoft franchise has a movie in the work, and I just do not know why. I mean, I guess in theory, the story of Watch Dogs can lend itself to visual media, such as movies or TV shows, but it only makes sense to do these type of game movies, basically, when there's stakes. When there is a new Watch Dogs game coming out, which maybe there is, I don't know. It is funny, and I think someone made a tweet about it, of like that they announced this while all of the Division fans are still waiting for that movie to ever come out, from Ross and Thurber. Supposedly he's still working on it. It's claimed. We will see if that ever happens. Final Fantasy 16 PC version is in the final stage of optimization, according to the creator. Here, I have a wild theory for you. I bet that game is going to be magically ready 1 year and 1 day after it released on PlayStation. This is such a funny thing where I think there was some commentary on Rebirth about it too, of like how, and even Sony's even admitted it, but that they take extra precautions, or they get extra exclusivity deals and stuff to make sure that their games, or games exclusive to them, only come out on PlayStation for at least a while, especially the really hyped up ones, because they want to sell consoles, a ton of them, and they've done that. That's exactly what has happened. The issue, at least in my opinion, is that then what happens is they if it's a third party, they make deals to delay it on PC and especially Xbox, or if it's first party, they just don't put out a PC version, or at least not immediately. It's just kind of BS to me. I do know that putting out a game that's supposed to work flawlessly on multiple platforms is very hard. I have no doubt about that. I also think that there is some very convenient timing that's almost certainly going to be found about when this PC version of the Final Fantasy 16 will be coming out, but we will have to wait and see. And lastly, there's a new studio, Giant Skull, founded by a Respawn veteran, Stig Asmussen. I'm so numb to these stories now, because almost every single one of these studios that you hear, they have some flashy trailer. They say, hey, here's our interesting new name for this new studio. And here we have the guy who created Call of Duty, and the lady who made all of the sounds for that game you love, and the guy who animated your favorite character ever. And it just gets to a point where it's like, okay, like that's fine. Let's just see what they make. And then oftentimes they're not making anything, or they're getting shut down, or they put something out and it's not great. The Callisto Protocol being a good example there of how, they were supposed to be doing one thing and something else was going on, and their game just ended up not being that great. And so when you see me be hesitant about games, especially like even Hellblade or Helldivers to a point, I was skeptical, but that's worked out. They also have a publisher. I'm just skeptical of these studios that pop up out of nowhere, are going to take 5 years to make a game because of that. And they're being led by these people who are supposed to just be like, oh, that person worked on God of War, so he must be the most genius developer who's ever worked. But maybe he was the worst person on that team. Like, you just never know. And so just because someone worked on some legendary games that you loved, it doesn't necessarily mean they are going to be installing mechanics like you would like them, or like they did for their other games. So again, I mean, I'm always going to be happy about seeing new studios. I just hope they do everything right, and I hope that they don't, end up kind of screwing people over by having these big ideas and then shutting down their studio in a couple of years. So we will have to wait and see about that. And that's where I'm going to wrap this one up. A slightly shorter one. I hope you enjoyed the new kind of format of the show. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please consider supporting my content on Patreon or my other platforms by checking out the links in the description of the show. This was the Baunfire Podcast. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.